Alright, in this video I'm going to teach you some tricks to fill out the unit circle. So the first thing that we're going to do is start with the fact that the unit circle has a radius of 1. So each of these points, every single point, the radius here, the distance between the center and the edge is 1. That said, it's real easy to find these 4 points that actually lie on the axes. So this one has got to be 1, 0. This one's got to be 0, 1. This one's got to be negative 1, 0. And this one's going to be 0, negative 1. Okay. The next thing we got to think about is a full rotation is 360 degrees. And a full or just no rotation at all would be 0 degrees. And each of these axes is 90 degrees apart from each other because they're right angles. So this is 90 degrees here. This will be 180 degrees. And this will be 270 degrees. We're just adding 90 each time. Then we have to remember that the two special right triangles have the 45, 45, 90 and the 30, 60, 90 right triangles. So these three right here are going to be 30 degrees, 45 degrees, and then 60 degrees. Okay? 30 degrees, 45 degrees, 60 degrees. Now what you do is every 90 degrees, you're going to start this pattern over again. 0, 35, 45, 60, 90. Or I mean 0, 30, 45, 60, 90. So you take 90 degrees and we're going to add 30 to that to get the next one, which is 120 degrees. Then you're going to take 90 degrees and add 45 to that, which gives us, so 45 degrees added to that is going to be 135 degrees. Then you're going to take 90 degrees and add to that 60 degrees. So 60 degrees puts us here at 150 degrees. Then 90 degrees plus 90 degrees is 180, just like we said. Then once you get to a new one of these where it's like, 90 degrees apart, once you get to 90, you start over. So then plus 30 is 210. Plus 180 plus 45 is 225. 180 plus 60 is 240. Then 180 plus 90, 270. Then you start over again. 270 plus 30 is 300. 270 plus 45 is 315. 270 plus 60 is 330. Now, we're going to turn everything into radians. So remember, the circumference of a circle is 2 pi r. So a full circle is 2 pi radians. Or, if you don't go anywhere, is 0 pi. Now, there are only 2 radians you have to remember. You have to remember that 30 degrees is pi over 6, and 45 degrees is pi over 4. All right, you got to remember that 30 degrees is pi over 6, 45 degrees is pi over 4. You got to remember those. But from these two, we can get the rest of them. So how do you do that? Well, every 30 degrees, I'm going to go pi over 6. So if I go another 30 degrees, or start with 30 degrees, I go another 30 degrees, get to 60. This is 2 pi over 6, which 2 pi over 6 reduces to pi over 3. And this is what we want. 1 pi over 6, then I go another 30, it's 2 pi over 6, then I go another 30, that's 3 pi over 6, which gets me to pi over 2. That reduces to pi over 2. Alright, 1 pi over 6, 2 pi over 6, 3 pi over 6. If I go another 30 degrees, that's 4 pi over 6, which reduces to 2 pi over 3. 2 pi over 3. Notice I am writing these out but this is the reduced one. That's what you want, okay? It's the reduced one that you want. 1 pi over 6, 2 pi over 6, 3 pi over 6, 4 pi over 6. If I go another 30 degrees to 150, that's 5 pi over 6. It does not reduce. And if I go another 30 degrees, that's going to be 6 pi over 6, which of course is just pi. 1 pi over 6, 2 pi over 6, 3 pi over 6, 4 pi over 6, 5 pi over 6, 6 pi over 6. If I go another 30 degrees, it's 7 pi over 6. That does not reduce. I go another 30 degrees, it's going to be 8 pi over 6, which reduces to 4 pi over 3. Then if I go another 30 degrees, it's going to be 9 pi over 6, which reduces to 3 pi over 2. Right? Divide both by 3, we get 3 pi over 2. That's the one that I want. Then I'm going to go another 30 degrees. So I got 9 pi over 6. I got another 30 degrees. That's 10 pi over 6, which is 5 pi over 3 when you reduce it. I go another 30 degrees to 130. That's going to be 10 pi over 6. 11 pi over 6 does not reduce. And of course, if I went another 30 degrees, it's 12 pi over 6, which reduces to 2 pi. So we're almost done with radians. Now we do pi over 4. So you start with pi over 4. Every 45 degrees, you go pi over 4. So pi over 4, if I go up here, that's 2 pi over 4, which reduces to pi over 2. And then if I go 2 pi over 4, then I go over here, that's going to be 3 pi over 4, it does not reduce. Then I go another 45 degrees down to 180, that's 4 pi over 4, which reduces to pi. Then I go another 45 degrees, that's 5 pi over 4, which does not reduce. Then I go 6 pi over 4, which reduces to 3 pi over 2. And I go another, and this will be 7 pi over 4, which does not reduce. You see, I'm just going up 45 degrees each time, and then 8 pi over 4, which is also 2 pi. So notice, we're almost done. We just have a few more points to fill out. Now, the last thing you have to remember is not only is 30 degrees 6 pi over 6, but it is also root 3 over 2, 1/2. And not only is 45 the same as pi over 4, but it is also root 2 over 2, root 2 over 2. Now, to fill the rest of this in, you have to remember something about quadrants. In the first quadrant, we know we've got plus, plus. In the second quadrant, we've got minus, plus. In the third quadrant, we've got minus, minus. And in the fourth quadrant, we've got plus, minus. Now, why is that helpful? Everywhere, and remember, you have to reduce all of these, but everywhere you see pi over 4 or over 4, then you're going to use root 2 over 2, root 2 over 2. But you have to change the signs based on what quadrant you're in. So we see a pi over 4 right here, so that's going to use root 2 over 2, root 2 over 2. We see a pi over 4 down here, 225, so that's going to be a root 2 over 2, root 2 over 2. We see a pi over 4 right here, 7 pi over 4, that's going to be a root 2 over 2, root 2 over 2. And now we fill the signs in. This sign is plus, minus, so this becomes minus. This sign is minus, minus, so this becomes minus, minus. This sign is minus, plus, so this becomes minus right here. Do the same thing with pi over 6. Everywhere you see a pi over 6, you're going to fill in. So we got pi over 6 right here. We got 5 pi over 6 right here. So we fill in root 3 over 2, 1/2. Then once again, we see a pi over 6 right here, 7 pi over 6, that's root 3 over 2, 1/2. We see another pi over 6, 11 pi over 6 right here, that's root 3 over 2, 1/2. Then we fill in the signs. Plus, plus, minus, plus, minus, minus, and plus, minus. Now, with 60 degrees, remember there's only one 30, 60, 90 triangle. That means that for 30 degrees, if it's root 3 over 2, 1/2, then for 60 degrees, you flip those. So this is 1/2 root 3 over 2, which means that everywhere you see over 3 is this same combination. So we got 2 pi over 3 here. That's going to be 1/2 root 3 over 2. For 4 pi over 3, that's going to be 1/2 root 3 over 2. For 5 pi over 3, we got 1/2 root 3 over 2. And then we fill in. So this is plus minus, this is minus minus, and this is minus plus. And that's how you do it.